The title of this video is a bit misleading. British Queen's Crowns. For in this video I'm going to talk about the crowns made for English and later British Queens Consort rather than for Queens Regnant. Any title I came up with that expressed that was clunky. However, as we will see, even Queens Regnant have in times past, for practical reasons, used the crowns made for Queen's Consort. Now, some of you may have watched my videos on St Edward's crown and on the Imperial State crown. I'll put a link in the description for those of you who haven't. And in those videos I talk at length about why the British sovereign has two crowns with different functions. Since the 13th century, the English, later the British sovereign, has had a specific coronation crown that was known as St Edward's crown. It was a holy relic and was carefully preserved and only used for the coronation. They therefore had to have a second crown. This was variously called either the Great, the Rich or the State crown. The title of this particular crown has been fixed only since the reign of Queen Victoria, and it's now referred to as the Imperial State crown, the imperial bit referring to the arches on top of the crown. This crown of state was worn for all other state occasions where crown wearing was required, openings of parliament, etc., etc. Now, in the Middle Ages, as with the king, the queen also had two crowns with the same two functions. Until 1649, the coronation crown of English queens was kept with St Edward's crown in the treasury at Westminster Abbey and was known as Queen Edith's crown, after Edward the Confessor's queen. Now, the origin of this crown is not entirely clear, but as St Edward's crown was most probably a late Saxon funerary crown placed on the head of the Confessor at his burial, Queen Edith's crown may well have been the burial crown of Queen Edith. Both crowns were rather underwhelming objects, but Queen Edith's crown was singularly lacklustre. In the 1649 inventory of the English medieval royal regalia, made before its destruction by Parliament, the crown was found to be made only of silver gilt and was set with a paltry collection of stones, one or two garnets, a couple of sapphires and a few pearls. It was worth only £16 by Parliament's reckoning, contrasting with the £48 value of St Edward's crown. I suspect the relative meanness of Queen Edith's crown, which much surprised the parliamentary commissioners who were expecting something a lot more exciting, again adds some weight to Queen Edith's crown beginning life as her funerary crown. So that was the first crown. The second was a rich state or great crown for the Queen's use. Used more often and of less spiritual importance than St Edith's crown, the Queen's state crown was either remade or replaced many times in the run-up to 1649. In the late 14th century, there appears to have been a number of state crowns or rich crowns for the Queen to use. In the Public Record Office in London is a document, a 40-foot long roll called the Treasure Roll, that provides an inventory from 1399 of all the precious goods in Richard II's collection, both the heirlooms of the English royal house and objects of precious metals and fine materials that Richard had commissioned himself. Staggeringly, there are 11 crowns listed in the roll for the use by the King and Queen. The list is headed up by the King's Great Crown. All of these crowns seem to have been decorated with fleurons, stylised flowers of different heights, and none had the imperial arches that we are familiar with on modern crowns. The inventory is not specific about which of the 10 crowns other than the state crown were for the use of the Queen. However, one of the crowns in the list remarkably still survives, and I have a video all about it, and it was certainly a Queen's crown. Known as the crown of Princess Blanche of Lancaster, or the Palatine or Bohemian crown, it was among the items from the royal treasury inherited by Henry IV at Richard II's usurpation. It survives as it was then given by King Henry IV in 1401 to his daughter Blanche when she married Louis III, the Elector Palatine. It's now in Munich. Dating from the 1370s or early 1380s, it was most probably made in either Paris or Prague for Richard's wife, Queen Anne of Bohemia, and was commissioned by her father, the Emperor Charles IV. It is a sublime example of late medieval craftsmanship. 12 enamelled hexagonal fleurons are topped with tall lily stems. The goldwork is set with diamonds, ballast rubies, sapphires and pearls, with the smattering of emeralds. It is not dissimilar to the crowns we see worn on the heads of Blanche's parents on their tomb in Canterbury Cathedral, which suggests that the crowns depicted on the tomb are based on real objects. By the reign of Henry VIII, there appears to have been only a single great, rich or state crown for the Queen's use, and it was not a particularly opulent object. It was by no means as ostentatious as the state crown that Henry VIII wore himself, a crown that survived until 1649. This crown, which had been worn by Catherine of Aragon and was of indeterminate date, was described in an inventory of 1521 made by Sir Henry Wyatt, who was then the master of the jewel house. The borgia, in other words the circlet of the Queen's crown, was set with a ragtag mixture of stones and pearls, most of second-rate quality. There were 6 sapphires, not all of a fineness, the inventory says, i.e. not all of good quality, and there were 2 less or smaller sapphires. There were 6 ballasts too, but not all were fine, and there were 4 small ballasts in addition to these of little value. To finish off this meagre collection, there were 24 big pearls, all of them assessed as not being very fine, and 8 smaller pearls. By the time we get to the 1649 inventory, the crown recorded in Henry VIII's reign had either been reset or more likely replaced by a new crown that was much more splendid. In the 1649 parliamentary inventory, the Queen's crown, like the King's state crown, was described as being made of massy gold as opposed to wirework, and it weighed 3 pounds and 10 ounces. It was studded with 20 sapphires, 22 ballast rubies and 83 pearls, and it was valued at £338, 3 shillings and 4pence. Now, such inventories, with their bold enumeration of stones and their value, give us no real sense of the style of the piece that would help us date it. Also recorded in the 1649 inventory is the third crown, a small crown enriched with diamonds, rubies, sapphires, emeralds and pearls. The stones alone from this crown were valued at £355, a greater value than the whole of the Queen's crown, gold and all. The crown's purpose is not mentioned in the inventory, but it appears to have been a consort's crown too. In various paintings of Queen Henrietta Maria, the consort of Charles I by Van Dyck, a small crown does appear, of the sort that would be worn just on the top of the head, and I suspect that this object in the paintings is the mystery small crown in the inventory rather than the official Queen's crown. So what of the official Queen's crown recorded in 1649? Do we have a depiction of it at all? Well, perhaps we do, from the reign of Elizabeth I. There is a painting in the National Portrait Gallery dating from right at the end of Queen Elizabeth's reign that depicts the Queen dressed in her coronation robes and crowned. The crown she is wearing is not the Tudor state crown worn by her father. That crown would have been rather too large without alteration for her to wear in any case. The crown depicted here has 4 arches and is set with loads of ballast rubies and pearls. But are the dark stone sapphires? They could be. I have a sneaking feeling that this is the Queen's crown, but we'll never know for sure. By 1650, all of these royal baubles were no more. The stones were sold off and the gold melted down for coin at the mint. And at the restoration of the monarchy, all the regalia had to be remade, which was an expensive job. When Charles II reclaimed his throne in 1660, he was unmarried. He married his Portuguese wife, Catherine of Braganza, in 1662, a year after his coronation. She could have been given her own coronation, just as queens had been in the past, but as she was a Catholic queen in Protestant England, that was decided against. There was no point making a crown that wouldn't be used, so no new consort's regalia was made until the coronation of Charles's brother James II and his wife Mary of Modena in April of 1685. As with the King's regalia, it was decided once again to replicate to some degree the regalia that existed before the English Civil War, and so 2 crowns, a coronation crown and a state or rich crown, along with a third item, a diadem, were commissioned from a goldsmith called Richard Beaver. The gold diadem was the replacement for the gold circlet studded with pearls that was traditionally worn by the Queen Consort in the procession from the Palace of Westminster to Westminster Abbey at the beginning of the coronation, and it was worn by Mary of Modena for that purpose. The state crown and the diadem of Mary of Modena are still in the royal collection, although now they are set with quartz. All the crowns in the jewel house were set with quartz when not in use, and they were set with hired stones for the coronation. You must remember that after the Restoration, the English monarchy was a budget monarchy, for the jewels in the royal collection had all gone, and it was not until the 19th century that the Crown was able to rebuild a collection of stones that would allow for the crowns to be set with precious stones permanently. Mary of Modena's state crown is a miniature crown worn on top of the head like the crown shown in Henrietta Maria's portraits. All three crowns are depicted in Francis Sandford's wonderful and lavishly illustrated account of James's coronation, published in 1687. Now, the whereabouts of the coronation crown is still a great mystery. There is a crown in the collection of the Museum of London, made of gilt copper alloy and now set with paste stones and imitation pearls, that is allegedly Mary of Modena's coronation crown. I don't buy it, and there are a number of reasons why I think this is unlikely. Firstly, the Queen's coronation crown made by Richard Beaver, like the Queen's state crown, was made of gold, not gilt base metal. Secondly, the Museum of London crown looks nothing like the illustration in Sandford, and in depicting the other crowns he is accurate in every way. Lastly, the Museum of London crown set with a mass of very large diamonds strikes me to have a very 18th century feel to it, and not at all a 17th century flavour. So if this isn't the coronation crown of Mary of Modena, it of course begs the question where that crown really is. Was it taken abroad in 1688, when James II and Mary of Modena fled to the continent at the Glorious Revolution? We'll never know. As well as being used for Mary of Modena's coronation, the state or ridge crown of the Queen was also used for the coronation of Caroline of Ansbach, the consort of King George II in 1727. It was also used at the coronation of two queens regnant, at the coronation in 1689 of Mary II as joint sovereign with her husband William III, and by Queen Anne in 1702. After Queen Caroline's coronation in 1727, Mary of Modena's crowns fell out of use, and so did the tradition of the Queen Consort having two crowns. This change was in line in many respects with the abandonment of St Edward's crown to crown the king. William III was crowned with St Edward's crown in 1689, but it wasn't until 1911 that it returned to use. All other kings, except for George IV, who had to be special, were crowned with the state crown. The disuse of the coronation crown for the king could be an explanation of why Mary of Modena's coronation crown has gone missing. Perhaps it was discarded and broken up. Queen Charlotte, the wife of King George III, was crowned with a tiny little nuptial crown that the king had given her on her arrival in Great Britain in 1761. It is studded with many brilliant cut diamonds. It actually rather resembles the crown in the Museum of London. Tiny, it was designed to sit on top of Queen Charlotte's head as an ornament and wasn't a proper crown in any real sense. This crown still survives, and it was given in 1858 by Queen Victoria to her cousin the King of Hanover after the famous dispute over the Hanoverian jewels. He had demanded that half of his grandparents' jewels should come to him as a family heirloom. The crown is still in Hanover and is used by women of the former royal house at their weddings. For the coronation of William IV in 1831, a new crown was made for Queen Adelaide, his consort. Fashions had very much changed, and Mary of Modena's state crown, though still available, seemed a little old, small and dowdy, and the nuptial crown of Queen Charlotte rather more a toy than a functional object. Queen Adelaide's crown was designed to encircle the Queen's head and not just sit atop it, and was modelled on the state crown of George II and the groundbreaking coronation crown of George IV. It was made by the royal jewellers Rundell, Bridge and Rundell, who had made George's crown, and like it was set primarily with stones, mostly diamonds from the royal collection. After the coronation, the stones were as usual removed. The crown wasn't of course used by Queen Victoria, who instead had a new state crown made to replace that of George II. At some point, the empty frame of Queen Adelaide's crown left the royal collection and fell into the hands of the Amherst family, who owned it until 1985. For a time, it was loaned to the Museum of London and was set with paste stones. Aspreys bought it in 1985 and later sold it to an American collector, but in 1996 its export to the USA was blocked. The Prince of Brunei then bought it and presented it to Queen Elizabeth II, and it is now in the Jewel House at the Tower of London, looking empty and rather forlorn. In the absence of any real alternative, all three consorts of the 20th century had a new crown made for their coronation, and they have all reflected the style of the age in which they were made. The first of these, the crown of Queen Alexandra, used at her coronation in 1902, was unlike any other British crown. It had 8 rather than 4 curving arches. Made of platinum rather than gold, it was set primarily with diamonds and had a very Art Nouveau feel to it. No pearls were needed on the crown, as poor Queen Alexandra's neck was weighed down with great swathes of them at her coronation. Her crown was designed so that the arches could be removed and the crown worn, if needed, as a circlet, and all subsequent consorts' crowns have been similarly made, and they've been worn at subsequent coronations without their arches. The centrepiece of the crown was the Koh-i-noor diamond, one of the largest cut diamonds in the world. This diamond is of course the source of much controversy today. A stone with many legends attached to it, it was an heirloom of the sultans of the Muslim Mughal Empire and later of the Maharajas of the Sikh Empire. It was given to Queen Victoria after the British East India Company's annexation of the Punjab in 1849. Prince Albert had it recut into its present form in 1851, reducing its size. The crown of Queen Mary was made by Garrards in 1910 and had, like Queen Alexandra's crown, 8 half arches. It was paid for by the Queen herself, and various new heirloom stones were set in it. The Koh-i-noor was once again centre stage in the front cross, having been removed from Queen Alexandra's crown. Queen Mary had 2 other important diamonds, Cullinan 3 and Cullinan 4, cut from the largest diamond ever found and known as the Lesser Stars of Africa, into the crown. Cullinan 3 was set into the cross on the top of the mond, and Cullinan 4 into the band below the Koh-i-noor. After the coronation, these were removed, and they were generally worn by Queen Mary as a brooch, known as Granny's Chips or Chippings by the late Queen Elizabeth II. For the coronation in 1937, the space where the Koh-i-noor once sat was replaced with a brooch containing Cullinan 5, made for the Queen to wear at the Delhi Durbar in 1911. Queen Mary had intended the crown to be a permanent consort's crown, and in 2023 this crown was chosen as the consort's crown of Queen Camilla. The crown was reconfigured by Mark Appleby of Mappin and Webb. 4 of the half arches were removed and the Cullinan stones were set in the crown permanently. In 2025 the crown was renamed the Crown of Queen Camilla, which set my YouTube comments box on fire in last week's video all about it. The last consort's crown to be made was that of Queen Elizabeth, the consort of George VI, better known to history as Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. It was made for the 1937 coronation, again by Garrards. It was necessary to make it, as Queen Mary intended to wear her own crown for her son's coronation. The Koh-i-noor was taken from Queen Mary's crown and was placed front and centre in the cross amid a dazzling collection of 2,800 diamonds, all set into a light platinum frame. As Queen Mary was still hogging the vast majority of the diamonds in the royal collection, Garrards had to be inventive in finding a source for stones to use. And many of the diamonds were removed from a piece that was no longer worn, Queen Victoria's Grand or Regal Circlet, made in 1858. Below the Koh-i-noor is placed a second large diamond that was given to Queen Victoria by the Ottoman Sultan in 1856, and also once in the Regal Circlet. Queen Elizabeth's crown was of course last seen in public at the funeral of Queen Elizabeth the Queen Mother in 2002, where it was placed upon her coffin. It really is a great work of beauty. Now, this video was released just after my channel hit 100,000 subscribers, and I just want to thank you all for watching, for liking and for subscribing, and for your warm support for my ongoing work here on YouTube. Thank you very much, and bye for now. If you enjoy this channel, you're bound to enjoy my magazine, The Antiquary. Published every month, it is a labour of love for me, and in it I explore some of the more obscure aspects of our shared history, all beautifully illustrated in full colour. It ships across the world, is offered in print and digital format, and readers give it 5 stars on Google. If you love your history like me, particularly the history of objects, buildings, people and places, why not consider subscribing? Subscribing helps support my work and the channel too. There's a link above and in the video description that takes you to the magazine website.